Tim is an independent producer, which means something, and we'll get into that later on perhaps. But he's a producer of great renown, and of course that's what has led him to be generous enough to be here as our Professor of Creative Practice at Flinders. Tim has been an associate producer. Now, anyone who can tell the difference between these things, you get a gold star or a chocolate frog or something. He's been an associate producer, a line producer, an executive producer, a location manager and a unit manager, and of course a capital P producer. He produced, as Vanessa mentioned, Whale Rider, the celebrated film from '02. He was associate producer on one of my favourite Aussie sort of B flicks, Razorback from 1983, which is a terrifically enjoyable film if you haven't seen it. He was the unit manager and production manager for one of my heroes, Peter Weir. Tim worked on Gallipoli and The Year of Living Dangerously in those roles respectively. He's worked in TV for over 30 years. He's probably best known, as Vanessa mentioned, as the producer of the first Lord of the Rings films, The Fellowship of the Ring, which had the quintessential cast of thousands, had a budget of some $280 million, Tim mentioned to me today, and made almost $1 billion at the box office. He's been nominated...
Didn't see a penny.
Welcome to life in the arts. He's been nominated for and received quite literally more awards than I could possibly list in half an hour. You say you've been nominated for as many awards as long as my arm. It'd take about 3 arms to list the number of things that Tim has been nominated for and won. So can I ask you again to welcome our guest, Tim Sanders.
Thanks very much.
Now, Tim, we've pre-baked some of these questions because we had to fit them into a PowerPoint. Now but we all will inevitably go all over the place. So we'll also leave some time at the end for questions. So to kick off, I wanted to ask you, Tim, people know what actors do, and people tend to think they know what directors and, say, cinematographers do. But very few people claim to know what producers do. So can you tell us what you do as a producer?
Yes, it is a sort of arcane job, and not many people do know much about it, and we like to keep it that way. But because we're amongst friends here, tonight I've decided I'm going to lift the veil and show you what is involved, and I'm going to start with a slide of what happens on a typical day for a producer. So we crack into it, 10, 11 o'clock, generally before midday. To stay on top of our game, we might swim, we might gym, we might even walk to the coffee shop. It's a good way to start. Then into the work. A couple of pages of script. You've got to try and get that out of the way before you take a well-earned break. We'll have lunch with agents generally to try and destroy people's careers or to render our own projects worthless. Then the biggest and busiest part of the day is opening the royalty checks. It's also the best part. You work out whether it's a business class, first class, or private jet to Amalfi this year as a result of that. By which time it's definitely cocktail hour, and then dinner with Brad or Nicole or Hugh or Rebel or somebody at the club du jour. So keep it to yourselves, but this is what it's really like.
We have a follow-up slide.
Yes, unfortunately, this is what it's really like. So the producer is the person who takes sole legal and financial responsibility for a project. You're the person who signs the contracts, raises the money, often with support of other people. But if anybody's name is on the bottom line, it's the producers, and they need to make sure that they own all the rights in their project in order to exploit, which is an industry term. It sounds harsh, but what it means is you have the ability to sell and trade your ownership of the project. And it goes without saying that by the time you've raised the finance, most of the rights have been given away in order to get that money. Reporting is endless. I think it's the most closely scrutinised business that I know of. We have daily and weekly reporting, both financial and creative and schedule-wise. Health and safety has emerged as a major issue for us now, and again, the producer is the person who will end up in court, even if they're nowhere near whatever unfortunate event has happened. Marketing and distribution is what it says, the getting of the project out to the public. I was in LA, I guess, about 5 years ago when the trades reported the cost of marketing now exceeds the cost of making the shows. So you can sense that in your own spheres, I'm sure. The follow-up goes forever because as long as a project has any sort of life, you maintain an involvement. But at the end of that, there you are. We have Best Director prizes, Best Writers, Best Actors, but no Best Producer. The producer gets the Best Film. And I'm kind of proud of that, but I don't know if you've ever seen the Oscars most recently. Every time they call that award, hundreds of people rush onto the stage to join you in claiming your prize. What do we got next? On the work side, finding the project source is critical. Now, that can come to you in a number of ways. Writers will pitch you, directors will bring it to you. You might have your own idea, but you need something to be the heart of the project that you're wanting to then develop. You begin your collaboration by working with the key creatives. The holy trinity of film production is the writer, producer, director. So you need to pull those people into the nest as quickly as you can, and then it widens out into crew and actors and all the rest of it. The production and post-production staff, and critically the composer. I can't stress enough how important the composer is in a quality show. They, in my view, are responsible for half of what you see. The emotion, they can turn a question into an answer, they can tell you when to laugh and cry. A good one is absolutely fabulous. And then financing, which is a huge fun part of the job. I might ask you to jump forward to the finance plan just to show you what happens here. So that's how you raise the funds for a film. Now, I have to admit, this is one of the higher end ones, you don't have to go through this process all the time, but this is one we actually did. The complexity is incredible. They have an event called closing, which is when you've finally got all your deals done and everybody's ready to sign. This was closed in London, and half a dozen lawyers lock themselves into a room and don't come out until it's done. I think this may happen in other industries, but that's the complexity, and perhaps if we go back to the industry structure, that's what pulls together all these different parties. These are the parties that you will deal with in a production. I see my dear students from this week, from the pitching class, are here. Great to see you, and we went through this together this week. They will deal in future with some, or if not all, of these different entities. Filmmakers, obviously, the cast and crew, agents who have an unbearable amount of influence on the project with nothing at risk and no particular involvement, but can make or break a production. Criticism is starting to mount about their role in the industry. Funding authorities such as Screen Australia and right here the SAFC are a terribly important part, but they have very big demands. They're dealing with taxpayer funds, so they'll give you a lot of hurdles to jump over. Australian New Zealand distributors are a requirement by the funding authorities if you wish to access their funds. These are companies like Transmission, Icon, and I just read today Rialto have closed their Australian office as a reflection of the way the industry is changing. The standard model of distribution is going out the back door. International sales and distribution companies are the entities that will take your film to the world, sell it into all the different markets. Equity investors, that rare breed of people prepared to put up their own dough. If you find them, grab them. Exhibitors, who are the picture theatres, and in many ways the backstop for the finance. So that the way it works is if you've completed your film, it's shown to the exhibitors and they decide whether it goes into their theatres or not. There's no commitment prior to that, so you're taking a bit of a gamble. And over Christmas in my small country town in New Zealand, I checked out the local cinema for sessions, and it had 4 sessions per week for a number of films, 6 sessions for Frozen 2 and 34 sessions for Star Wars. So it shows you that the big shows, four-wall, that take out the cinemas, you can't get your film in there. The exhibitors want it because they know they've got a guaranteed audience. So that's the sort of competition you can face. Broadcasters, I'm talking about free-to-air, who are fading in their influence slowly, and streaming services which are growing at the rate of 10 to 15% a year and will very shortly, in my view, be the way we mostly get our screen content. My theory, just if you're interested, is that we'll have global networks. We used to have Channel 2, 7, 9, 10 here in Adelaide. Now we're going to have Netflix, Amazon providing you with sport, news, entertainment, all the subjects that you're interested in, with a little bit of side digression to other suppliers. So that is what we're working through with the students here. I'm very keen for them to get to understand that that's what takes place in the world. And I'm hoping that we can actually get to make some stuff and put it through that pipeline in due course.
It's an incredibly complex and changing landscape, as you've said, Tim. And in fact, teaching yesterday in a TV topic with my colleague Nick Godfrey, we were doing some facts and figures, and this year Netflix is projected to spend 35 billion US, which is 53.6 billion Australian dollars, on their own content. That's for this year. And by comparison, the government's 10-year plan for a future health initiative is 5 billion over 10 years. So that's a bit sobering. The changing landscape is fascinating, and many people like myself were quite sort of shocked when the most recent Martin Scorsese film dropped onto Netflix. So in order to see the new Scorsese movie, instead of 20 years ago when going with my friends to the cinema, it was a major event, it turned up on your screen.
Well, don't forget, though, Nick, that they did a thing called Day and Date, which is when it played on another format. And in fact, as I understand it, it did have a cinema release, but that was to advertise the Netflix show.
Yes. My goodness, things are changing. So what are you doing, Tim, in order to prepare, this is a leading question really, in order to prepare the students here for entry into this very fluid industry?
Well, it's early days. I've been here a week, but what I'd like to see happen is that the students start thinking. Let me backtrack. It's very clear that everybody has employment on their minds, and rightly so. And it's also clear that the university is, dealing with that and steering in that direction, which is very admirable. But I'm keen to see whether it's possible to set up something like a production company, loose, but in essence, here at Flinders, and that product is made. Movies, technology's never been easier. Collaboration with like-minded people when you're here on campus is a no-brainer. Pilots, streaming shows, podcasts with pictures. There's really no end to the sort of content you can create, and I'd love to see us getting into a frame of mind that was like that. And I'm certainly urging the students to think in terms of creating their own work after they leave. There are a number of production companies here, that's TV channels, but the opportunities might be limited in South Australia. If you get into the frame of mind that you're going to produce something by yourselves, particularly if it's backed up with something you've already done at university, then you've got an opportunity, I think. Australia's lucky; it's got a quota. It means that there is a definite amount of stuff that has to be made. 60-70% of prime time on all the networks, which is wonderful. It would be good if South Australia got a bit more of that. And my message to the students is analyse what's being done elsewhere. Find a niche, that you think you can make work. Make it work at university if you can. If not, make it work when you leave. It's getting into the frame of mind of being producers, not waiting to be employees, if possible.
Inspirational words. It's that notion of being self-driven is very important, I think, and it makes me think about what you mentioned earlier about how projects come to you. As a producer, what's your typical sort of first point of contact with an emerging project? Do you read a novel and think, I'd love to see this on screen, I'm going to call so-and-so? Or do directors come bashing on your door and say, Tim, I want to make this film, help me do it? How does it tend to happen?
It's all of the above. Once you're established, you get pitches, from people you've never heard of from all around the world. Directors will bring in projects most definitely. Writers will send projects most definitely. The two I have in development now, one in New Zealand and one here, we maybe could show a little of them. They're both from newspaper articles that I read. This one, The Guinea Pig Club, is the story of a New Zealand surgeon who went to England in World War II, one of only 4 plastic surgeons in the country, and he learnt very quickly that having radical new surgical techniques is wonderful, but he had to deal with the spirits of the disfigured airmen and give them a will to live, and that was the hook for me that made this a story worth telling. So from a newspaper article, I built up the pitch document, which was there before. That's the cover of a 10-page document, which helps you when you're putting it out to the aforementioned distributors and sales companies. There's an example of an audience engagement plan which we do for every show, and paragraph 1 is headed "The Point." What is the point of this show? You analyse, in crystal clear terms why it should be made, not I like it, it would be good, my friends would like to see it. You then go on to projects which have informed it, which would be similar. All sorts of demographics and detail follow that. So to answer the question, the source material can come from any direction, but typically it's from a writer or a producer or a director.
Switching back to money again, which is on so many people's minds all the time, especially with a huge project like Lord of the Rings. $280 million budget. Where did that come from?
Crowdfunding. 280 million people with $1 each? No. Unfortunately. No, look, it's a complicated one. New Line Cinema, the division of Warner's who had the front running for the show, did not share with us the detail, but it's interesting to have learnt on that production that all the big studios have treasury departments. These are areas where people are employed to scour the world for cheap sources of funding, tax incentives, any number of breaks that they can take advantage of, and this in fact was beyond me. But there was an elaborate deal done with the Bank of New Zealand called a put deal. Now I looked it up, and a put deal has something to do with an agreed buyback at a certain rate under certain conditions. So after Rings had wrapped, I'd made a relationship with their head of specialised banking, who told me he never wants to work with Hollywood again.
Who could blame him? Okay. There's so much to talk about. Sticking on Lord of the Rings for a second. Okay, you're dealing with hundreds and hundreds of people on a production like that. You've got creative temperaments, as we none of us have them, but other creative people do. Dozens of locations, thousands of props, visual effects that come afterwards. How do you have any sense of what your own name is while you're trying to control all of that?
You do get lost in something as big as that. We had 5 crews working 12-hour days each, but on different times, so that there was somebody shooting somewhere any hour of the day or night. The amount of footage that was being produced is churned out. They were spread all over the countryside. I had a fellow producer that I brought on from America to lend a hand, and we tried to divide the tasks, but it's overwhelming. There's no question, and you end up becoming a logistics manager. You're not looking to see that the quality of the rushes that are coming through are as good as they could be. You're just looking to see that they're there so you can tick them off and get on with the next bit. And, in the end, I guess Peter Jackson was our quality control. We had the studio riding on our shoulders the whole way. But it becomes very daunting. And then the project I did immediately after that, Whale Rider, was a much smaller domestic New Zealand show set on a marae, a Maori communal ground, where we had, the closest of relationships with the people from there, the best time, a great result. It was just, chalk and cheese really for me.
Do you find that you're able to insert more of your own creative presence into a smaller project for those reasons? Because the huge thing is such a kind of factory that has to make a certain amount of money no matter what. Is the smaller project the one that's in a way more creatively satisfying for you?
It is for me personally. It also gives you flexibility. On Lord of the Rings we did what we call an animatic, where we hand drew every single frame of the film beforehand, put actors' voices against it, music, sound effects, so you could play it almost as a cartoon and watch the entire movie. So we shot the film before we shot the film. And then as footage came through, either from previs or from the actual shoot, we'd pull out the drawn parts and plug in the actual stuff. And so there was always a version of the film in existence. And, to Peter's credit, the footage that was shot by the crews was faithful to the storyboards. It didn't wildly swing across, except for one example, which I'll play for you later on. But in a smaller production, you are there. A producer's job and a director's is to trim the sails, and every day you get back from where you went over yesterday, or catch up with what you need to. So you're always working at that level. But on a smaller film, the creative content of what you're doing to achieve that is much more influenceable.
Now, that in a weird way brings me to another question about intention. And there's a wonderful quote. Now, there's a minor coarse language warning for this, but it's a quotation. So with everyone's permission, Vice-Chancellor, I'll do this. Andrew Dominic, who is a wonderful New Zealand filmmaker who made Chopper and Killing Them Softly and various other wonderful, wonderful films, was interviewed about a day on the set shooting Chopper. And he said, and I quote, "On that day we had an A plan, which is what we'd get if everything went well. And we had a B plan, which we figured we'd probably switch over to at a certain point in the day. Then we had a C plan, which was what we'd do if everything really fucked up. And in the end, we went with the D plan." Now, I wonder, because having been on some sets myself, none of them compare to yours, of course, but there's always something that'll go sideways. Now, as a producer, how do you deal with that when, if the weather destroys a set, or an actor turns up drunk, or not that ever happens, how do you deal with stuff changing under your feet?
It's quite easy. You blame the director. You're right. In a small way, the trimming of the sails I talked about, is what you do every day. And what you're describing are just degrees of what happens. We've had sets blow over, storms come through, actors break their legs. It's all happened. You always have a plan B or C in your mind, but if it's absolute catastrophe, on one or two occasions only, we've stopped production and regrouped. I'm aware of other shows that have been handed over to outfits that we call completion bond companies, who are risk managers and insurers, and their role is to guarantee that the show will be made no matter what, and the no matter what includes quality. They don't care at all. They want it finished for the least amount of money, and they can step in and fire anybody and take over the show. So I'm aware of ones that have been through that process and suffered badly for it. They've been made, but they probably shouldn't have been.
So we hope for the A or B plan.
Exact.
Okay. Now, I've got another a sort of question about, and sorry I keep having to put on my glasses here, about this conundrum of art and money, which is, the very title of our talk here. Don Simpson, an infamous Hollywood producer from the 80s who worked on Top Gun and Days of Thunder and lots of very, very, very mainstream and very silly films that made an awful lot of money, sent out an infamous memo to his studio that's now become Hollywood folklore. And he said in that memo, our job is not to make art. Our job is to make money. And sometimes we're going to have to make art in order to make that money. This is, I've been haunted by that ever since, and I wondered what your position was on what your sense of the projects that you work on and bring to life. Are they? Is the spark that lights under you a creative and artistic one? Is it wanting to bring something like that into the world, or dare I ask, is it the pile of cash?
Where did you say that guy was from?
Hollywood. Yeah.
There you go. No, look. I'm happy to say. Well, let me backtrack. There was a period here called 10BA, which was an infamous tax act that the government had brought in order to promote film production, and it was roundly abused by the financial sector. And I'll never forget. A senior accounting type guy came to me and said, "Look, let's make 3 movies. Doesn't matter what they're about. Doesn't matter how good they are. Let's just get them done." And it was something that you couldn't fathom. So of course we did them. No, we didn't. No, we stepped away from that one. But that was the mindset of some people, who are in the money making business. As I mentioned with the profits from Lord of the Rings, we haven't seen any. We're not really in the money-making business. And the Netflix model, which is taking over the traditional distribution model, guarantees that you don't make any more money out of your project other than what you sell it to them for. So, yes, there's probably a sizable check in that. You get the cost of production plus a margin for yourself, but then you never see anything else. Whereas up until this date, it's been any sales that you get in any market, anywhere, you get a share in because you own a percentage of the project. But look, there may be 1 or 2 people in New Zealand and Australia who are driven by money. In fact, I can think of 1 or 2, but the vast majority are driven by wanting to create something worthwhile. And I have a friend who's a big shot in the insurance business, at the top level, who's very envious of the fact that we in this business can start with an idea that becomes a sentence, that becomes a film that lasts forever. We create stuff, and he's very jealous of that.
Indeed. Tim, I know and this is one we pre-baked. I'm fascinated by, again, talking about the idea of change and things changing as while the production's occurring. Tim provided me with some clips that are quite fascinating, and we might. In fact, you should say which order we want to show them in, but there was a fascinating lesson in there about what a script page looks like, or in fact what 3 or 4 lines of a page of script might look like, and what the eventual scene ends up being. As our film production students know, roughly speaking, a page of script is 1 minute of screen time. You have a very fascinating example from The Lord of the Rings where this was not at all the case.
Do you mind if I hold off on that one?
Sure.
And maybe do that last. Okay. Can I suggest we have a look at a clip from Lord of the Rings which shows something on a big scale of what is possible here at Flinders. So we had a script that said 100,000 orcs attack 100,000 riders from Rohan. We also had a Prime Minister, Jenny Shipley, who was very supportive and said, would we like to borrow the army? So we said, yep, that'll be great, until we found out that the total number in the armed services was 4,000. So we're 196,000 short. We had one guy, Steve Regulus, working by himself, who had a belief that he could create a program for us that would achieve our needs. And we were all a bit sceptical. We thought we're going to do it in the old way, which is you have your actors in the foreground fighting hard, you have the stunt team behind them rough and tumbling, and then you have the bowling club extras at the back. G'day Frank, how you been? What are you up to, Bob? Check it out, you'll see it everywhere. But Steve decided that he could pull this off, and one day he called us into his tiny pokey office in Wellington and showed us 2 stick figures, like the Saint, if you remember him, 2 stick figures. And he pressed go, and one lunged at the other, and the other fought back, and the other bobbed down, and then they embarked upon a series of actions with each other that were not animated. His clever and simple solution was you give each of these characters a decision tree, and they will randomly select one of these motions. 1, fight back, 2, bob down, 3, fall over dead, 4, run away. So we thought, look, this is going to be great. He slowly built it up till he had a crowd of 400 stick figures, and he pressed go, and 380 ran away. So we needed some tweaking on that. We just had to make the random selection a little bit less random. But in the end, here is what we achieved with a program from one guy in Wellington, and it's now in universal use around the world in the film business and in other applications. And it's the sort of example that I'd love to be able to talk to collaborators here at Flinders about looking at. So that added a bit of dimension to the show, we thought. Look, we're getting on for time, so I'm going to show you the next clips. There's a wonderful director called Julie Taymor, who is absolutely on top of her game when it comes to design, choreography, and other elements of film production. And this next clip shows what happens when you have a successful merger between camera, choreography, set design, visual effects, acting, lighting, all the elements in a film, and this is what you achieve. To me, this is sublime filmmaking.
With Uncle Sam.
So bad, I want you, I want you so bad, it's driving me mad, it's driving me mad. I want
shouldn't be in this man's army?
That's it. That's the end, unfortunately.
Sorry, there was a punchline there, but never mind. She's fabulous, as you can see, and that's highly influential with a stage background. This is a very simple story of a English boy meets an American girl in the 60s at the time of conscription, and that's her brother being sent over to Vietnam. That's the end of it, but it's told with Beatles songs. Every song, every piece of music is a Beatles track, and it works really well. I've got one last clip. Is there anything more we should discuss, or should we go to that?
Well, let's go to that, but we need to read the script. This is, I don't know if anyone can see that. We're talking about 5 lines of script here.
We've got it on a slide.
Oh, we do have it on the slide. Okay. There's the line of script. So this is a fifth of a page. So this really should be about 20 seconds worth of screen time. This is what it turned into.
So in the script, did you see anything about 1,000 orcs with arrows and these staircases smashed into 1,000 pieces? It's an example of where a director, Peter Jackson, decided that he wanted to cut loose. And my job as producer is to try to keep the studio off his back. What should have been filmed in a morning was about a week. 20 seconds becomes 2 minutes 25 of screen time. Special effects, stunts, actions, the works, but it's a sequence that's worth having, so you do what you can to get there.
There are 2 things that fascinate me about that. I know we're out of time, but I have to ask you. One was, okay, the script says, Fellowship race down the stairway, Aragorn picks up Frodo, leaps across the chasm, angle on Aragorn, Gimli, nobody tosses a dwarf. That's what's in the script. Then we have that. So when Peter said, look, that 20 seconds is going to be 2.5 minutes, how much would you estimate, Tim, if I can ask this, would that sequence that we just saw have cost, just roughly? Can you estimate for us?
This is a guess. We spent probably $500,000 a day on that film. So, instead of it being a half a day, it was 10 days, so you can do the maths. But in fairness, when you, as we said before, if you blow out one area, you try and trim another. But, you know, for most directors, if you blow out in one area, you blow out in another as well.
Yeah. So my final takeaway from that is that cost $5 million. I'm going to keep that page.
Yeah, sure.
That's pretty. Tim, look, I've got 100 more questions to ask, but we are out of time, and I imagine people do want to mingle and talk to you and ask you things and hit you up for projects. Thank you very much, Vanessa and Vice-Chancellor Sterling. Thank you, everyone, for being here. It's been a real delight, and Tim, most especially, thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
It's been a delight to talk to you, and please, everyone, come and join us down in the tavern, and we can continue the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Nick. Cheers.